Welcome to DunnWise Perspectives, a podcast about stories of resilience and shifting mindsets. I'm your host, Doris Dunn. My guests are leaders, entrepreneurs, and everyday people who've navigated change, faced uncertainty, and discovered new ways of thinking when life didn't go according to plan. Hello, Heidi. How are you today?
I'm excellent. Thank you, Doris. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, I am so glad that you're here. You are my very first podcast guest on my brand new podcast that I think is going to be called DunnWise Perspectives. And I couldn't have a better guest as my first guest. I'm thrilled that you were not only on this podcast, but you were on my former podcast, Leader-ish. And you were a wonderful guest on that podcast, and you have an incredible story. And I'd love for you to just take a few minutes to introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you. My name is Heidi Siefkas, and I would say storytelling is in my DNA, whether that is my 4 published books. They're all nonfiction because I believe that life creates stories for us that don't need any fictionalization. I'm also a public speaker. I've done a 10X talk. I'm now a podcaster of the Look Up Mindset. And to create some good stories, I'm an adventurer, whether that's kayaking the rivers here in Tennessee, hiking in Hawaii, or who knows where I'll end up this year, maybe the Grand Canyon.
Oh, so exciting. And another great reason to have you on as our first guest is your books, podcast, TEDx, everything is about mindset. And this podcast is also about mindset. And I am looking for people who have overcome some incredible obstacles. I know you have a lot of stories of overcoming obstacles, and it's not just one. It wasn't like you just overcame one obstacle. It seemed like one happened and then another and then another. And I would love for you to share your journey with us just at a high level. What was your journey? Where did you start and why it's even named Look Up? So maybe share a little bit about your journey and how Look Up even began.
Life could change in an instant. We all know this. And I found out not once, but twice. And that's the thing about life. You don't expect it. And the only thing that you can control is mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And what prompted me to create the Look Up mantra was something as boring as taking out the trash. So I was in my early 30s and I was a high-powered travel industry executive, jet-setting the world, Mexico City one day, Berlin the next, Costa Rica, New York the next. I was happily married to a Brazilian chef. We owned a quaint home in South Florida, and we had a supportive community of friends and family. And in taking out the last night's pizza box, my life changed in an instant. I turned the corner to take that box to the dumpster, and unbeknownst to me, a tree limb weighing 1,000 pounds from 30 feet in the air clobbered me, leaving me there, unconscious. Now, I awoke 5 days later. Let that sink in a little bit. If you lost 5 minutes, let alone 5 days, you would be scared. But I woke up not knowing where I was and in a neck brace. So the doctors put the pieces of my puzzle together for me that Good Samaritan called the paramedics. I got to the trauma hospital. I was there with a broken C7 vertebra, and I was to undergo neurosurgery. So basically, neurosurgery was successful. As you can see, the C7 controlled some pretty important things, eyes and hands, but it was a very lengthy recovery, a year-long recovery. I couldn't go back to work. The accident actually happened in upstate New York, not in South Florida where I lived. So there were many challenges, and with a year-long prognosis, I had time to evaluate every aspect of my life. And that kind of picture-perfect summary that looks good on LinkedIn and on paper wasn't necessarily the truth. I discovered that my husband had been unfaithful for a very long time, living a double life. That high-power career forced me to resign because of my lengthy recovery. So in one fell swoop, health, marriage, career, blah. I call it my when all balls drop moment, and I share that full story and all the details and the mess in my first book. And what I decided was I had a really important decision. It was either to rebuild the former life or to architect a new one. And ta-da, I decided to architect a new one, and that alongside building a new life, I would embrace that I can't control these things. I couldn't control the tree limb, my husband, my employer, but I could control how I reframed that situation and the mindset, and that's where Look Up came from. So that is reinvention of life number one.
I would love to know when you woke up from that hospital bed and the emotions that you felt, and we'll let the husband go for just a second, but just your injuries and having to deal with recovery. When you first woke up, I'm sure that your mindset wasn't, okay, we're going to turn this into a great situation. What did you first feel, and how long did it take you to make a conscious decision not to let that situation control your life?
So I knew about the infidelity before the tree hit me. So the tree almost was like the knock on the head that I needed to wake up and actually say, yes, this is what's happening.
How long before the tree limb did you know about the infidelity?
The night before.
Oh, no. Oh, wow.
So in the story, in the book, it goes into details as to how I found out and whatnot. But when I woke in the ICU and underwent neurosurgery, I decided, okay, we're going to take my life and treat it as a triage doctor. So I can't make decisions about my marriage or my career right now. I can only focus on my health. And
Mhm.
so that was getting out of the hospital first and foremost. And then starting to do whatever I could to rehabilitate. And basically, when you're trying to fuse your spine, it's basically being still. The only thing that I could do was do meditation walks, limited into what is called a Miami JTO brace, which is from your neck down to your belly button, then around to your spine. So I couldn't move like this. My observation anywhere I would go would be like a long lawn sprinkler, because I
Mhm.
had to move my entire torso at the same time. So the process of getting out of that brace was nearly 6 months until I took it off and I had to wean myself out of this cage. And I called it a cage because one, it was my protector, but also it was my prison. So I focused on my health. And then once I started weaning myself out and doing physical therapy and also getting mental health support, because there wasn't just one facet of my life that was changing, it was multiple at the same time. Then I dealt with the deciding of to continue with marriage or to divorce, and that was the second tier of my triage. Then after I decided to divorce and I could not forgive and forget, it was time for a different type of love. I decided, hey, it's now time to work on that W-2 or new business. And that's when I decided I was going to lean into my storytelling full time, whether that was for a corporation or if that was a hybrid of writing books, speaking, and that.
Wow. Did you do this all by yourself, or who was your support system? Who was there around you giving you support through all of this trauma?
Lookup has two tenets that you can be in the moment and find the upside. But the secret sauce to making it work is that you don't do it alone. You have community. And I did not do my first reinvention by myself. And I call them my clan because they weren't all DNA family members. They were also friends that have become family, but also other people came out of the woodwork that I had no idea would provide me with wisdom and support. For example, there's not many people that have said that they've had a back injury and have been laid up in mid-career, but some of my former colleagues had, and they gave me support. They said what helped them get through some of the issues of needing to be immobile, some meditation, other people that knew how to find a good lawyer for a divorce quickly, that not all your friends have gone through divorce, but someone has. Or maybe they were the executive assistant of someone who had gone through a divorce and did it quickly. So there were people that came out of former work environments, even some online connections that showed me support. Because if you think you can get it from one person, you're wrong, because no one person has all the information to help you through a multifaceted, full-blown life catastrophe. So community is central.
Oh my gosh, community is so important. I'm such a believer in community, and I know social media has its challenges, but at the end of the day, I am so grateful for social media because I think it does create, or you find a community when you need one, and you can relink with people that can support you that you forgot even existed. High school friends, college friends, people from former workplaces that you forgot that you're even connected with on some of these social media channels. And if you're willing to get vulnerable and you're willing to share your story, it's amazing how many people come back to support you and help you in so many different ways. And it may be finding a lawyer, it may be delivering a meal when you need it most.
Absolutely.
Yes. Where would you say your greatest community was? Did you find a lot of the support online through social media, or did your close knit friends find other friends? What were some ways that you found your community, either developed it or rekindled community that you'd forgotten was even there?
I think it was primarily my inner circle, and then they crowdsourced, if you will, other
Hmm.
people in their circles. It was my friends and then friends of their friends. I did source some through social media. When this happened, it was in 2009, so it was at the very beginning
Yeah.
of Facebook. I think my accident and disclosing it on Facebook forced a lot of my friends, because some weren't on Facebook at the time, and they found out from maybe one of their sisters, and they were upset that they didn't know about my accident, but I wasn't going to take my Rolodex and call everybody to let them know. It was one of
Hmm.
the ways that I could mass communicate, hey, if you don't hear from me, this is what happened and I'm recovering. I'll be laid up for the next year. Feel free to pick up the phone and we can catch up.
Wow. What would you say was the most unexpected internal shift that happened as a result of basically, like you said, this triage, these three different things that happened at this pretty much at the same time? And it took a while to overcome that. But as you started to triage, what internal shift happened for you?
I would say that I was a type A superwoman, one woman show who could conquer anything if I put my mind to it. And the accident flipped that to taking things in bite-sized chunks and maybe not dealing with what I thought was the most emotional part of the scenario, which was the love of my life, but I had to focus on the health. And so I just had to say one thing at a time, and that was not what was natural. So I had to really slow down and not be a superwoman.
Do
Okay.
that without getting frustrated? Because I could imagine many of us, myself included, if all of a sudden I'm also go, go, go. I work out every day. I walk the dogs every day. If I have to slow down due to a cold or the flu, I can't stand it. I can't imagine being laid up and flat on my back pretty much for a year without building a lot of anger inside of me. And I'm curious how you did that. How did you make the shift that our listeners could even learn from that? And if they're suffering from some trauma and maybe they're not laid flat on their back, but they're really struggling with how to overcome the challenge that they're facing, what would be some good tips? You said you went from you're going to do it all to little chunks of change. What are some great ways that some takeaways that we could take from what you did?
There is power in movement, even though I was in an immobilization brace. I could walk. And so I got myself out of my physical location. And I did this even when it was cold. And just one step in front of the other was enough to escape my reality for a moment and
Mhm.
start almost meditating in a walking format. And it's no secret, people have been doing pilgrimages, whether it's the Camino de Santiago or the Sister Trail in Japan, the Kumano Kodo, to do the same thing. They're on a quest to find meaning to their life, their loss, a spark for a creative project. So I totally embrace walking. Now, if you cannot walk, you can do the same by doing another form of meditation, whether that's gardening, yoga, and as I said at the beginning, adventure can do the same thing. When you're doing something that is a little bit fearful and it's something that you haven't done and you're in the zone, you kind of escape your reality and you are on a one-track mind. So those are things that you can do. And also having a reminder in your daily calendar to force you to do this,
Yes.
because we typically put our mental health on a back burner, or we'll say, later, later, later. But we really need to do things for our mindset every single day. And so I have a reminder at 11 that says, look up. And it
Mhm.
forces me for 15 minutes to kind of look up, get off the technology device, just take a moment and find what the beauty is, what's going great right now. Do I feel great? Is the sky blue? Is there snow on the pine trees? Is there a great sunrise? Is my favorite song on the radio? And then find the upside in the situation. Sometimes you may not find it immediately. Sometimes
Yeah.
that comes with time. Just like being laid up and finding out about your cheating husband and career loss all at the same time. What could be the upside of losing everything? It was creating a better second version of myself.
I love that. I was listening to a Mel Robbins podcast, it might be 2 years ago, and one of the things she talked about is looking for hearts. So as you're going on a walk or even sitting in your office and taking the time to, and it doesn't have to be a heart, it could be some other symbol, but she used hearts. And as she's talking, she looks around her room and she said, well, I see one here, I see one there. But as you're going for a walk, you might see it on a tree, you might see it in the form of a leaf, you might see it as the form of maybe it's even footprints in a snowy walk. It could be anywhere. So now you're focusing on something else. You're focusing on not the trauma, not the sadness, not the woe is me, but you're focusing on something positive. And I know that I can sometimes I walk the dogs every day and I can go into a dark place. I can start thinking about terrible things that have happened and I'll have to turn myself around and say, it's going to be a great day. And that's the mantra. And then I start listing off why it's going to be a great day, all the things that are in front of me, not only that are either on the calendar or planned, but maybe even why, like you said, the pine cones or the trees out there or the sunshine and the beautiful clouds and the fact that I can walk the dogs, the fact that I have dogs. All of those things are looking at the beauty of something rather than focusing on the sadness or the challenges that we have in front of us. So I really love this. What would you say, what is one misconception that people have about resilience?
That they don't have it.
Mm.
We all have the ability to be resilient because we all have the opportunity to change, and it is never too late. And resilience is basically embracing adaptability.
Oh, that is fabulous. That is amazing. That's such incredible wisdom. And I think that we need to say that again, that, that people that they don't believe that they have it. They have, they feel they're so deep in the well or so deep in the hole or whatever analogy we want to use. They don't know that they can climb out of it. They don't know that there is something positive on the other side. But there is a saying, and I'm going to say it wrong, but I think it's failure and success are on the same path. It's just that success is a little further ahead. And I think sometimes people give up. They feel like it's not working. I'm at failure. This is it. I'm going to turn around because it's not working. And they don't realize that 3 steps in front of them is where success is, or the beginning of success. And if they just tap into that resilience and that knowledge that it's going to be a better day tomorrow or even later today, and that they just need to keep prodding forward, just keep moving forward. Like you said, even the going for a walk, taking those steps. And I'm a firm believer in action and just taking that first step. This is my first interview for my podcast. Yes, I was doing a podcast last year with someone else that had some experience, but getting this on the calendar, scheduling this interview, and just diving in, taking that first step. And I think we can all do that, especially if we put it on the calendar and we have an accountability partner that helps too in terms of resilience and making sure that buddy of ours, that accountability partner, makes sure that we move forward when we don't personally think that we can.
The
Can you
tree
tell?
taught me resilience, but it almost forced the lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's another answer to your question, that people sometimes wait for life to serve them a lesson when they could actually take a hold of the reins
Mm-hmm.
and adapt without something negatively impacting them, so that they need to then pull themselves up and start going step by step.
Yeah. And you said something important there, taking hold of the reins. And you said this a little bit earlier before, what you can control. When you have the reins, you are in control of that proverbial horse, and you can help control where the horse goes, making it trot or gallop or turn left or turn right. But it's still a matter of having that. What can you control? You can't control everything. You couldn't control that limb falling on you. You couldn't control your husband's infidelity. But what you could control is triaging the situation and then turning it into something positive. So I think taking the reins and taking control over what you can take control of. Another Mel Robbins expression is let them. You can you have to let things happen. You have to let them, what you don't have control over, let that happen. All you can take control over is how you react, how you behave, how you respond. And that's what you can take control of, and that's what you should do. My next question is, I know that you're interviewing a lot of people. Can you maybe share a story from someone else's life that really stuck with you?
Gosh, I interviewed nearly 30 people for my latest book, and they're real life sheroes and heroes. They have overcome tremendous obstacles and come out the other side bigger, better versions of themselves. And I chose people from different countries, different ethnicities, religions, genders, ages, to figure out if Look Up really resonated with people,
Mm-hmm.
almost as if I had a hypothesis and I was proving it scientifically to be proven by the strength of numbers. And I did. I found that they may say it differently, finding a sliver of hope, the silver lining, turning lemons into lemonade. But they said that from the lowest point is a great jumping spot for moving upwards and onwards, and that they never did it alone. Their triumph was always shared with their clan, their community, their family members. And I guess I am interviewing for the second time my contributors to the book, and they are my first season of the podcast. And I interviewed quite a few of them already. And it's interesting that since the book has been published, it was published in March 2025 to now 2026, their stories have even evolved. So one story is of Pamela Reeder and her family in Maui. I started writing the book while I resided in Maui, and I had a second life curveball that I had constructed another perfect life. I had found love again. I moved to Hawaii with my love, and we were both caregivers for my father, who was in his late 80s at the time. I had written multiple books, did the TEDx talk, even did some international tourism as a educational tour guide. So I was really living my second life well. And on Maui, I started writing the book and was halfway through it. And then the love of my life, his name was Brian Treptow, and he was more adventurous than I am. And he was a pilot. And in trying to save someone else's life on the Big Island, as he was a medevac pilot, he crashed with 2 crew members on board and passed away. So didn't know if lookup was strong enough to get off my knees of losing my life partner, as well as the future that we had dreamed of was gone. So in essence, what I thought my future would be had been stripped from me in an instant.
For
I
the
can't
second time.
for the second time. But without the lesson of the tree, I don't think I would be here today, because that knocked me down. I didn't get up. It took me a long time to crawl. Then I eventually got up and showed my face to the world. And it took nearly a year and a half until I felt comfortable saying, look up still works. There is not much of an upside of losing someone, but if there's an epitome of being in the moment, Brian was that. There's not a squirrel that he didn't chase, and he and I had 12 beautiful years of love, and that's the upside, that I had that. So the tree showed me resilience, love showed me possibility, and losing that love showed me how powerful the love was. So with kind of my own gumption and knowing that Brian would want me to continue the project, I jump-started that. And I looked for stories with more fervor that were more extraordinary. And I get back to Maui. I needed to have something that was where the book started. And most people know that the Maui fire of Lahaina was in August of 2023. I had already moved off the island 6 months prior, so I was not there, but I knew it impacted thousands. In fact, the entire island was impacted, whether they were housing people, whether they lost their jobs, whether they were some of the thousands that never returned to Maui because they needed to move off for the economic impact that it had. But by the time I had recovered mentally and emotionally of losing Brian, was almost 2 years after the fact, well, a year and a half after the fire, and people were starting to be comfortable with sharing their story. And through a friend of a friend, I was introduced to Pamela Reeder, and she was willing to share her story of losing her home, evacuating with her 2 adolescent girls, husband and cat, and seeing the apocalyptic view of the hills on fire and the sun setting behind them, and just seeing people walking down the street with suitcases and their belongings, not being able to use cell phones, and finally getting to the other side of Maui, and there's tourists waiting to get on their snorkel boat. It was some
Yeah.
version of hell on this side,
My
and then it
gosh.
was Honeymoon Central and Maui Epic Vacation on the other. Anyway, by the time I was talking to her, she had good news, which was that she had an excellent insurance policy and that she had permits to break ground to build a house exactly where their old house was. She was hoping to get into that home before this Thanksgiving, so the past one, late 2025. And in talking to her for the podcast, they have since moved into the home, and they were the first home constructed. Now around them, there's several that are being constructed, but they were the first to actually to construct, move in, and also celebrate the holidays there.
Mm.
Now, with that said, homecomings are sometimes bittersweet. So you think this is like victorious, victorious, but she said, my connection to look up is I thought that everything was going to be positive. And I almost was fearful because I was moving into a neighborhood that wasn't the same, and crying about that it wasn't the same community as it was. But then she said, someone's got to go first.
Yeah.
And so she flipped that switch of being this negative Nelly into she's pioneer Pam, and I'm going to be the welcoming committee. So it shows how powerful our remote control of our own mind is, just by saying, I guess it's my turn.
Wow, that's an incredible story, and I think there are similar stories with the fires that were in California too, and I know they've done a lot of recent stories on the one-year anniversary of the fires in California, and they're showing a lot of resilience there as well, and they're interviewing the people that thought that maybe they would never come back, and they're starting to build their homes and businesses. And you see that in so many communities that have been devastated by hurricanes and fires and tornadoes and even riots, and where it's the people that have done the damage and the overcoming. But I think it's so important, like you said, internally, we need to flip that switch, and we need to, and it's not easy. Sometimes you just have to do it. Even though it's uncomfortable. And this is also where that accountability partner or that community comes in to support you. And when you're very, very scared, to what we'll use that the rain analogy again, to get up on that horse and ride again, if you have a community around you getting you up on that horse and putting you in that saddle so that you can grab those reins and start taking control of your life. I think that is a beautiful picture and a beautiful vision of what we can do. Do you have any thoughts on people that are struggling? It's easy for us to sit here and say, you just do it. Like Nike says, just do it. And not everyone can do that. How do we help those that are so deep in the hole or so struggling that they just can't see around that next bend and they don't think it's possible? How do we encourage them to take those reins or at least take one step forward? Do you have any thoughts for them?
Yes. First thing, breathe. It it comes back to that. You can control that. Just the simpleness of stopping and breathing, that can bring some clarity. And I'm going to be the first to tell people that look up doesn't mean you're a Pollyanna and you're positive about everything. You have to have the roller coaster of emotions, and you cannot get out the other side without acknowledging the anger, the sadness, the loss. And it may take time to find what that upside is, but eventually, I'm telling you from experience and from the writing of the lookup book and the podcast, that every wound, every hurdle, every life hiccup eventually turns into wisdom. You don't have to do it all at once. Just
Yeah.
start out with one step, whether it was me getting out of bed and remembering to eat and shower after Brian passed, or whether it was those walks in that immobilization brace. Those were small things. I was not conquering anything huge, but it was the choice that I made to take that walk or get out of
Well,
bed.
but it was that day, that moment, it was huge. That step was huge. You may not look at it as huge today, but at the time, it was huge. And I think to that question that I just asked, and the person that feels so stuck they can't move forward, that first breath, breathing is huge. And be proud of yourself for taking that first breath, that first step, and give yourself grace for the challenges that you faced or not being able to breathe yesterday or the day before. Give yourself grace for that. But today, take that breath. Yeah. I want to hear a little bit about your new book. So you mentioned that you've launched your own podcast, and we'll have
Yes.
all of that information in the show notes, along with the information on how do you get the Lookup book. But tell me a little bit about your upcoming book and how it's different from Lookup.
So this, and this as behind me, Lookup Global Stories of Resilience, was basically, the idea was sparked by me sharing my story about the tree. And then people came out of the woodwork, whether it was after reading the book, whether it was a book club or at public speaking events, and they would share their story. So eventually I said, I've got to put a compilation of people's stories that maybe don't have the talents, don't have the time, or they never wanted to write their story, but they now see, now that they're older or further removed from the very emotional, pivotal moment in their life, they say, yeah, this would be helpful for someone else going through something trying. So in writing that book, I said, okay, I want to have a good collection from around the world so that we can show, regardless of age, gender, any of the demographic check boxes, that there's a commonality. And it's that the power of perspective and community will get us through darn near anything. As soon as I pressed publish, another story came in via my Google form. And it was from a amazing doctor in Wisconsin that had tremendous loss. And I was like, this needs to be in the book. But it was already too late for this book. So then I said, there's definitely going to be a second edition. So then I start promoting the book on podcasts like your former one, Leaderish, and others, news stations and public speaking events. And I thought of, why not reverse engineer the next book? Why don't I do the interview on a podcast and see which stories really resonate, and perhaps use AI to just transcribe the interview and then use my wordsmithing abilities to create those chapters. And it's almost like doing the market research as to which stories got downloads on the podcast. So then curate the book based on that. So there will be another book, but it's going to be based on probably season 2 and 3 of the Lookup Mindset podcast interviews.
That's amazing. Okay, now I'm gonna ask a selfish question, because I am also in the process of writing a book, and I think I'm doing the reverse engineering. So I'm doing what you're doing on your second book for my first book, and finding people with stories. And my book will also be about mindset. And it's in its infancy. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what it's going to look like, what the chapters will look like. But the bottom line is that I want the stories and the interviews that I have, I want people to walk away with some thoughts on how they can take that story and where they see themselves in the story. Even if a tree limb doesn't fall on their heads, they can certainly see themselves in the story of something terrible happened and how can I overcome that? How can I overcome this? And so, selfishly, what does the writing process look like, especially between the first one and the second one? And I think you just gave us a little bit of a hint that you're going to have AI transcribe and that you'll wordsmith and you'll put it together. But If you can share a few secrets, maybe to help me and other people out there that are budding authors that want to write a nonfiction book, what are some thoughts and suggestions that you could give us on helping put together a bestseller?
Short chapters. No one has time to read a 30-page chapter. Keep them to 4 to 5 pages so that they can jump in where they left off and not fall asleep in the middle of the chapter.
You don't want people to fall asleep. Yeah, you don't want people to use your book to help them fall asleep. That's not a good idea.
You also don't need to write a book in a chronological fashion. You don't
Mm-hmm.
need to even write it in a way that they have to read it from chapter 1 to chapter 20. You could make it so they could open it up anywhere and get that daily dose of mindset wisdom. My first 3 books were nonfiction and memoir based off of my life, and those were based off of journal entries. The 4th book that I talked about, I interviewed other people's stories, so it basically was leveling up. And so part of my writing process is that the goal is that, 1, that it inspires others, but that the owner of that story, the person that went through it or the family that went through it, that they also feel proud of it and that I penned it and did it justice. A part of the writing process is trying to get that essence out of someone else, whether that's interview style, then I pen it, or if it's interview styled and AI transcribes it, then I amend it to more Heidiisms than what naturally came. And then the last part is the approval from the person that shared the story. Sometimes once they see it in writing, they want to make something bolder or maybe soften something or emphasize something else. But I want them to make sure that they feel proud about what that chapter was. And that was actually the most nerve-wracking part of the writing process, was pressing send on a chapter that I wrote for someone else because I was fearful. On the first one, on the 30th one, the same. Still fearful that person was going to say, "This is crud." And
Or maybe
this,
this is not what I said.
yeah. Or
Did that
did
ever
you
happen?
no one ever said that. That's what I was fearful of. But what was really interesting, I gave everyone the opportunity to use their real name, have a fake name, and at the 11th hour, just like when I launched my first memoir, I said, "Oh my gosh, did I just make a mistake? I just am about to get naked in front of a book club in Juneau, Alaska. I'm publishing this about my life." It's like airing your dirty laundry.
Yeah.
But now I have to put myself in their shoes. They didn't choose necessarily to be an author, but they're sharing their story.
Mm-hmm.
And that's being very vulnerable for them. And I had one contributor that said, "Did you use my real name?" I said, "Yes, you agreed to that." And I said, "Okay, why did you originally want to share the story?" We eventually got to a place that she felt still comfortable. And now it's shocking, but she's the most vocal of all the contributors about the story, has publicly spoken about it. She's also participated in my podcast. It's opened her up to see the healing, not only for herself, but for others in sharing that story.
Yeah, I love that story. I know that I've been writing my weekly blogs for about a year and a half now, and a lot of them I open myself up, and I'm very vulnerable on many of these blogs that I write. And the more vulnerable I am, the more positivity I get back from people, and where people can see themselves in the situation. And it makes you comfortable when you are vulnerable. It's scary to be vulnerable but when you're willing to open up, when you're willing to be vulnerable and share something that someone else can learn from or someone can relate to and feel like they're not alone. And I think that's why I like to share some of the vulnerable stories, and I'm not afraid to share those stories, is because I know I'm not the only one out there that has experienced whatever situation it is. And when I share it and someone else can relate to it, then they don't feel as much alone. And I think that's so important. And I love the fact that this person can now share her story over and over again. So thank you so much for sharing those tips and tricks. And I'm trying to get better at journaling myself. I used to be really good at it as a teenager, and I think I stopped for decades, and now I'm starting again, and it's very helpful. And even these weekly blogs, it's helpful to force myself and not I don't always have ideas every single week. And sometimes it'll be Wednesday night or Thursday morning, and I think I have no idea what I want to write about. And then something will happen, or I'll see a quote and I'll realize this needs to be said. And it usually winds up resulting in positive feedback. What's next that scares you and excites you?
What's next? The podcast launches in February of 2026.
And what is it called?
The Lookup Mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And all of those people that participated, I have already interviewed them and penned their stories. So I did the format of pre-interview, feeling them out, wrote their chapter, they approved the chapter, sent them the first copies so they could be reading the whole book. Now they're guests. Some of the stories have continued on in a positive manner. Some of them have just skyrocketed, like Pamela Reeder. But others had a twisty-turvy, I guess it's not ending, but continuation. For example, there was one woman who was in remission when we approved the chapter, but by the time of publishing, she had come out of remission. And she still said she was looking up and around in spite of that diagnosis.
Wow.
So what the next challenge is, now I'm going to be doing what you are doing, having people you may not know on the podcast. It's going to be the vetting of maybe getting some information before a pre-call and then doing the actual interview after that, and finding the right combination, like the right recipe for the right combination of stories of resilience, life transformation, and adventure. Because I don't want it all to be boo-hoo. I want there to be some cheerleading in there, and that in order to impact, you got to get to the person's heart. And
Yeah.
maybe people don't resonate with the word meditate or mindset, but they sure can say, I will hike Kilimanjaro, and that's my jam. So you have to meet them where they are.
I love that. Are there any questions I didn't ask that you wish I had, or questions that you want to answer that I didn't ask?
I guess a lot of people ask me how you become resilient. And the first thing I say, age will help, because life serves us all curveballs. Or then there's the fast track, and that's the fast track that I'm on. I'm 49, and I feel like I've been served a couple big curveballs. But the third thing is that, as I said before, it's embracing what your DNA and Darwin's law is, that we all need to evolve or we go extinct. And we're on this planet maybe for 80 years. You're not going to be the same person you are in your 20s as you are in your 40s, 60s, or 80s. And we hope that we evolve to better versions, smarter versions. And heck, by the time I'm 80, I don't know how many more life curveballs or evolutions I'll go through, but for Heidi.
I hope not too many. And I also, not only I love that we want to be better humans, but I think it's also that we can be better role models for others. So people can learn from our mistakes and our challenges, and maybe they don't have to relive those situations in order to have a better life. I know that's what we want for our children, and even if we don't have children, for the young people that are growing up around us, and we want what's best for them, and we want them to have really great lives. I feel like so much of what you've taught us today and that you've taught us in your past books, and I know will come to us in your future books. I'm so excited about going to your podcast, listening to your podcast, and I will be a huge fan. And I appreciate so much that you took the time today to be on my podcast. Thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it. I'm so glad I know you, Heidi.
Likewise, I wish you the best of luck in both endeavors. Stories do matter.
Thank you for listening or watching this episode. If something from today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love for you to share this episode with someone who might need it, or take a moment to reflect on what stood out for you. You can find show notes wherever you get your podcasts. And if you enjoy the podcast, subscribing or leaving a review helps more people find these conversations. Until next time, keep learning, stay curious, and remember, sometimes a small shift in perspective can change everything.